I am so honored to be here with you all this evening. Before I begin to share two things, I will, after some background, address very specifically what cycling did for me. But right now, I'm going to ask us all to take a deep breath to help ground us because I'm taking you on my journey and I'm going to begin where it hurts. I was lying in bed with a suicide note next to me when he found me. I lived in a beautiful home, had a loving family, and was physically healthy. But none of the beautiful things surrounding me, none of my beyond fortunate circumstances mattered to me. I just wanted to be free from the excruciating pain that I felt. The man who found me, now my husband, rushed me to the hospital. And I'm happily still here to speak with all of you this evening. My suicide attempt came as a halfway point. I'd had a journey to that moment. And though I'd hoped then that somehow it had just gotten it out of my system, it did not. And the journey continued. But I'm here. And that hope that was always there, I eventually found. And we'll talk about that a bit more later. Just remember, my message is one of hope, not despair. My journey began when I was a 6-year-old little girl living in New Jersey. From my earliest memories, I recall feeling that something just wasn't right. My parents loved me and I didn't need or want for anything. I do know what people saw on the outside was not what I was feeling on the inside. I remember feeling hollow and uncomfortable in my own skin. I began to understand more as I grew older and my parents began sharing more with me about my family. My dad's uncle had taken his life, and there were others in my family who struggled with suicidal ideation. At one time, everyone in my immediate family was taking psychiatric medications. If the average in the country for mental illness is 1 in 5, my family was 4 for 4. So for those of us who ask the questions of yourselves or others, does mental illness come from nature or from how we are nurtured? Is it acquired or inherited? Is it a biological disease, a physiological condition, or as some think, just in the mind? Is it situational? Is it environmental? Is it the result of trauma? The answer for me, in part, to get past the why me question was most of the above. Later, much later, I would move on to a much more important question. Now that I have it and accept that I have it, what do I do with it? But none of the reasons of why you have mental illness matter when you're in the depths of darkness. You just want out one way or another. I was a young adult at the time of my attempt. And for nearly 10 years after my suicide attempt, I sought out countless psychiatrists and psychologists, took nearly every psychiatric medication made, often many at once, had 3 hospitalizations, and received over 90 electroconvulsive shock therapy treatments, all trying to find something that would fix me. After several jobs, I quit work altogether. I lost my structure and I continued to fall apart. The diagnoses rolled in. I was or had, depending on the doctor or the day, major depression, bipolar 1, bipolar 2, mood disorders, anxiety disorders, and borderline personality disorder. And despite the treatments and the counseling and the medications, I was still struggling with suicidal ideation. My first hospitalization came as a surprise. I had told my husband and my new psychiatrist that I felt once again that suicide was the only way out. When I woke up from my next electroconvulsive shock therapy treatment, or ECT as we call it, I found myself in a locked wing at Sharp Mesa Vista Psychiatric Hospital. I felt betrayed and I was really angry. I couldn't see it at the time that my husband felt so helpless and he was just trying to save my life. I talked my way out after 2 weeks. I told them, I've got it now. I can do it. I didn't, and I didn't. Within a year, I was back in the hospital for 10 days, again as a surprise. I talked my way out again. On some level, I believed I was okay, but there was another side of me that knew better. I thought since I could still get on stage and perform with my band, that I at least had some level of okayness in me. Somehow I was still able to put on my costume and sing for 4 hours in a night. But then I found myself unable to function the next day. I'd given all the energy I had the night before. Many of us who have mental illness continue to function publicly on some level, which is why others don't always see it. But that can also make it harder to reach out for help. Back then, my husband didn't understand mental illness, and he'll be the first to admit that to you. He would sit at the edge of the bed, pointing out the sunshine coming through the window and just tell me to get up and do something. He would talk about how lucky we were to live in our dream home or what he regarded as my looks and my talent, but it only made me feel worse. It was like a double whammy. I was being told that I had no reason to feel depressed and to feel empty, but I also knew that at one level as well. But I did. So then I felt guilty for feeling depressed and for feeling empty and for being sick. So in trying to help, my husband had become another standard bearer for stigma. He knows that now and has grown into become an amazing mental health advocate. I found comfort in self-injury through cutting and burning myself. I started using drugs. I just wanted to feel something, or sometimes nothing. Then when I concluded I couldn't control my depression, I yearned for something to feel in control of, so I turned to food. My weight fluctuated over my childhood years, and it affected my self-esteem. I thought since I couldn't control my depression, maybe I can control food. I could stop eating, and I became anorexic. I dropped to 100 pounds and was still dropping, taking handfuls of diuretic pills a day when I ended up in the hospital. Then I checked myself into the eating disorder program at UCLA. Note, this time it was my decision. 6 weeks, and this time I did not try to talk my way out. I didn't want out until I could find some ground to stand on. I knew I wanted a different path and that I wanted to choose it. I was so tired of hating myself and for having others choose the path for me. I wasn't ready to give up, and I still believed that there were options. I knew I'd tried a lot of them, but not all of them. Basically, I was asking the question, why did I think that doctors had the answer for me when they're not living inside of me? I knew they meant well and were trying to help me, but they hadn't found the answer so far. I decided I would take personal responsibility for my care. This was the first pivot point. I would not simply wait for others to tell me what to do or what was wrong with me. This is not to say I didn't need guidance or help from others, because I did. But the time had come for Kim to either show up for herself or not. And for the first time in my life, I showed myself love. This was not an overnight process. After my UCLA eating disorder program, I started to eat again, choosing cleaner, more natural and eating more natural foods and eating more regularly. I quickly realized the incredible relationship to blood sugar and mood. And by the way, hangry isn't just a made up term. And I improved. In April of 2011, I decided I wanted to have my last EC treatment. I decided to slowly come off of my psychiatric medications I was on at the time with the help of my doctors. And please know that I do believe in these treatments. They can be very helpful tools and are needed by many in managing mental illness. And they did indeed help me at times throughout the years, but I felt I needed to find something else. I had no assurance that these decisions would make a difference. I just knew that I needed to manage my life rather than having others manage it for me. And when I made that decision, the search for the cure or the fix began to dissipate. The moment I realized that mental illness could be my partner and not an enemy, I felt like a huge weight was lifted off of my shoulders. I became awake and I became aware, and I began connecting to Kim for the first time. There were days when I had just a little bit of energy inside of me, and I would encourage myself to do one small task. And I would praise myself for doing it. I would actually pat myself on the back physically. It was something sometimes as simple as hanging up some of my clothes, not canceling an appointment, calling someone back. These were huge accomplishments in comparison to where I had been. I felt an inkling of empowerment, something I haven't felt in a very, very long time. I was moving, taking action, and doing things for myself. I found myself having authentic conversations with people. My true friendships thrived, and I let go of some people who I felt were unhealthy for me. I focused on having a routine and I started exercising. I took and I still take my mental temperature every day. That mental temperature is my measurement of my personal fuel tank, which holds my energy. Certain things I do deplete my tank, and I slowly began to recognize what those were. Just because I felt great yesterday and had a full tank yesterday does not mean I'm ready for a long drive today. And if I dip into my reserve tank, it's often too late. And I started trying new things that could bring some joy or purpose into my life. I tried a Buddhist meditation retreat. I'm not very good at meditating, but it was peaceful. I wasn't mad at myself about that. I didn't feel like I failed. I tried Navajo weaving in Arizona. I'm not a very good weaver, but it was peaceful. I wasn't mad at myself about that. I didn't feel like I failed. I tried skydiving unattached to an instructor because I wanted to learn how to trust myself. I jumped, I landed. I thought it was quite exhilarating, but I knew I hadn't found it yet. I wasn't mad at myself about that. I didn't feel like I failed. Then I adopted Labrador retrievers from rescue an organization, from kill shelters, or who turned in by their owners. Now that worked. Two of them are here today, Sky and Riley. The unconditional love of a creature does fill you with joy, so I felt some progress. I joined the board of directors for the San Diego chapter for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and I eventually became the Education and Program Services Committee chair. That worked too, more progress. I was learning to help others. In a sense, I was planting seeds along the way in this journey of hope. And as this was evolving, my negative self-talk inside my head started turning into more out loud positive self-talk. I also began to change my self-sabotaging behaviors into healthy practices. Then I tried cycling and it stuck. This beautiful journey with cycling began in late 2012 when my brother Terry Johns, who some of you in the cycling community may know, invited me on a bike ride up Mission Gorge Road using my sister-in-law's bike. He knew I was searching for something to help take me outside of my own thoughts. He had also seen my darkest days and was searching for ways to help me help myself. I loved it. And a few weeks later, I bought my first road bike. I hadn't ridden a bike much since college at UCSB on my beach cruiser, and I was never much of an athlete. Terry also didn't know if this would stick because so many things hadn't, but he had hope. And truthfully, I had no idea where this day would take me, but it changed my life. I began riding 3 miles a day, then 5, then 10, then 20. And then I did my first 62-mile ride with Terry by my side for support, with him listening to me almost every 20 minutes say, I can't do this. And in his loving and a bit harsh brotherly way, he'd tell me to just shut up, pedal, and you've got this. And I did. I tried different things in cycling, but most importantly, I found community and I found that I love the road and I just love playing to ride. Last year, I rode over almost 12,000 miles. Cycling, just the raw physicality of it, pushes me to limits I never thought I could experience. It is both mental and physical exercise. I have found something that moves me and I will keep moving for as long as I can. I know that first I had to want to change. Then I had to be ready and willing to change. Then I had to try changing and take ownership. And then happily, though I tried many things as I listed, I came upon cycling as my method and my means for change. I went from someone who couldn't stand to be in my own skin and who couldn't bear to be in my own head to looking forward to being with myself for hours a day. Now, sometimes I do my best thinking on the bike, and sometimes if I'm riding hard, I can barely think at all. Both are magical and awesome experiences. I have created beautiful friendships with people who have a passion for the cycling community, and Lauren and Eileen are prime examples of that. Cycling is freeing, challenging, mindful, connecting, exhausting, and exhilarating, all at the same time. It is also the way I challenge myself both physically and mentally. Some days I break my own personal records, and some days I just have to have an inner dialogue with myself to just simply pedal. And on days when I'm working harder intervals or struggling to find the energy to ride, I literally once again pat myself on the back and say, "Good job, Kim, for accomplishing both of these difficult tasks." So I began to practice these pats on the back more often, and now it comes naturally. And on the days I'm having an unfulfilling ride or struggling mentally, I remind myself where I used to be, unable to get out of bed. I remember the days I would wake up angry, I was still alive, and feeling defeated that I woke to face another day in the darkness. Now I find myself looking forward to the feel of my feet touching the carpet in the morning to begin another day. I'm not saying every day is full of bliss, but I'm grateful that the majority of my days are powered by light instead of darkness. And I don't take those days for granted. Cycling gives me structure and purpose, which is not only fantastic for my mental well being, but it also means when I'm not on the bike, I'm vastly more productive. If I look back, when I started doing little things, brushing my teeth, making my bed, calling someone back, eating, something called hope showed up inside of me for the first time. And then it became riding a bike, riding it far, and riding it hard. I know I live with a partner in addition to my husband. My partner, and perhaps for some of you, your partner is mental illness. It will always be a partner. There's no return policy for my partner. I accept my partner. I do not take it for granted. I do not assume it will stay in the back seat of my metaphysical car. This passenger in the back seat of my car will sometimes try to climb into the driver's seat and grab the wheel. I do not hate the passenger for this. I assume I need to keep my awareness of what my passenger can do and my partner can do if I don't take care of myself. And being on the bike is my way of taking care of myself. I have discovered that communicating to others what I've learned during my journey may help some people. In addition to my public speaking at conferences and in Zoom meetings and in schools, I started looking for a way to make my story and my message more widely known, more useful, or packaged in a way that would help others to not give up. In June of last year, Padres Pedal the Cause created an event called 20 for 20 to raise awareness and funds for cancer research. I decided to ride 20 hill repeats for the cause. My husband is in remission from leukemia, and I always partake in Padres Pedal the Cause events in his honor. After I completed the 20 for 20, I started to think maybe I could find something that would resonate and that would bring attention to mental illness. I was looking for a way to communicate my message and wanted to raise funds for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And I came upon the Everest Challenge. It intrigued me. People around the world were taking it on in their sport and climbing the same cumulative elevation as the height of Mount Everest, which is now 29,032 feet. I remember that it wasn't that long ago that brushing my teeth or getting out of bed felt like climbing Mount Everest to me. And now I was thinking about climbing the height of it. What a beautiful irony, I thought to myself. But it was just a thought. And I had many thoughts before. Often such thoughts would quickly be gone from my mind because I didn't set a plan in motion. But this one lingered and I started to act. I really wanted this because I wanted to help others see that there is hope, that even though you think it can't get better, it can. So this was a huge part of my why, and it was driving me to set this intention in motion. And I thought maybe I could do it on my bike. I mentioned it to my awesome coach, Janelle Spilker, who told me she believed in me. She said if I wanted to go for it, she would help me achieve my goal. And after thinking about it for a few weeks and bouncing off a few friends and my husband, I decided to take it on. I knew a lot would be involved: training, planning, forming a crew, among other things. I would have to ask for help and accept help from others. This was new for me. I have a hard time asking people to show up for me. With Janelle's help, along with my friend and training partner, Roger, I trained for 3 months, not only working on my fitness, but worked on getting my nutrition dialed in. And on the day of the event, we made a base camp at the fire station on Honey Springs Road in Hamul. I had my crew led by Matt Hoffman, who some of you may know. The positive self talk I kept giving myself at times was being drowned out by the historically programmed negativity and self doubt up until the start time, but I was fighting it hard. And indeed, some of that was to be expected. The main thought in my head that day as I rode my bike was, Kim, you will not give up on yourself like you did before when you tried to take your life. That day, I rode my bike repeatedly up and down a hill 58 times, riding 180 miles until I not only climbed the height of Mount Everest, but climbed 30,100 feet. And when I got off the bike, the tears began to flow, and I once again pat myself on the back and said, you did it. Donations came in, and I raised over $30,500 for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I am still in awe of the support I received, and it's a testimony to how many of us are affected by this cause. We also filmed it because we knew we wanted to be able to communicate it as a symbol, as a metaphor for the journey. We have over 15 hours of film footage and interviews to work with, and are at work on a companion book. We hope to make a lasting and powerful impact on mental health awareness. Some number of months from now, I hope to share my story, not to make me anything other than a woman on a journey, but a story we hope will inspire others. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. I always love hearing your story. You have so much great information to share. So you touched on a topic briefly, and I'm hoping you can expand on it a little bit more for me. So one thing you mentioned was having to let some people go, and becoming aware of your internal fuel tank. And I think that this is a really important message, really, no matter where you are in terms of happiness or mental illness, depression. I think this is something from a self care perspective that we can all be better at. So I'm hoping maybe you can talk us through kind of that realization and how you got to that point where you were able to say, I need to let this person go. I need to understand when I wake up where I'm at and what that means for what I'm going to do that during that day.
Yeah. Well, I sometimes use the term kind of extroverted introvert. I'm really someone who rejuvenates alone. When I love being social and I love being on stage and I love doing things outwardly and talking to people, but when I do those things, that depletes my tank. Other than some people who are naturally extroverted, that they feed off of that energy from others or when they're doing social things. So it took me a while to really understand that. And it also took me a while to really be able to convey that to my husband, because he is very opposite of me that way. And it caused some bumps in the road for us, to be quite honest, because he didn't really understand it. But as I started to understand more about myself and kind of checking in where I was in the day and trying to then go back and say, why am I feeling so drained today? And I would play back in my head what happened the day previous, or who I was talking to that day, or what kind of conversations I had, or what did I eat or not eat. And I started to become more aware of that. And as I started to become more aware of that myself and being okay with that, I was able to communicate that to the people around me, like my husband or my family or my friends, and say, hey, this is not personal, but if I do this, this is what's possibly going to happen. And that's not good for any of us. So myself being aware of that, not doing too many social things at once, or sometimes people that we care about, we enjoy being around. Sometimes we have to gauge where we are. I mean, not everybody's energy is perfect for us. And also, we change over time and people change over time, and recognizing that we might not grow together in friendship or in relationships, we have to be able to say it's okay. I use the term sometimes in when people are going with therapists, that it's okay to let your therapist go if it's not working for you, because that's a relationship. So I mean, kind of like in those terms.
Thank you. And then one more question before we move into a little bit more on the education resource side from Melissa. So something else that you brought up, and I think I just really want to emphasize this, was your self-sabotaging negative self-talk and then flipping it to the positive aspect. And, you actually, and I want everyone to know, like, Kim actually tells herself good job out loud, and she actually pats herself on the back. And I think that's really important to communicate, because I feel like that technique can really help us all. And it's saying it out loud makes you believe it more. So if you want to talk a little bit about that and how that's helped your journey.
Yeah. Um, well, I used to self-sabotaging is a huge thing for me because I saw it happening in the moment, but I just couldn't change it. One example would be, for instance, say I had to go on stage, to perform. Well, if I didn't give myself enough time to figure out what I was going to put on, these seem like small things, but when you have anxiety, it's a big thing. That I would just wait to the last minute to figure out what costume I was going to wear. And then if I was, since I have, a history of eating disorder, I still have body dysmorphic issues and self-image stuff that I still have to work through, like many of us. So if I didn't set a plan in motion, I didn't give myself enough time to prepare for it, I would just go into a meltdown, an anxiety attack. So one of the ways I took that was I learned to give myself enough time, plan in advance, pick the outfit the day before, and then have a backup in case it doesn't work for me. Also, I make my bed in the morning every day. I used to not make my bed because I figured when I was depressed, you know what, I'm just going to climb in it anyway. So why make it? And so it was just this small shift of, you make your bed, it's an action, and it's a restart to the day. And the other thing I also started to do is weighing myself. I really rarely weigh myself. And if I do weigh myself, it's done with a real big talk with myself, a check-in. Where are you today, Kim? How are you feeling? If you get on that scale and the number is not what you want to see, are you going to be okay? And the majority of the time is probably a no. So I don't weigh myself, but I am able to fight that urge to get on that scale and weigh myself. And so that knowing what works for me and what the cost benefit analysis is one of the ways I kind of changed that.
Awesome. And the other thing, sorry, I'm going to touch on one more thing before we go to Melissa. The other thing that I really liked and resonated was the whole process you went through in terms of wanting to change, and the 3 steps you went through of wanting to change, then being ready to change, and then trying to change. And again, the takeaway here is you tried multiple things. They didn't work for you, but they weren't considered failures, right? You were positive about it, said, okay, I tried this, good for me for trying it. I'm going to go try something else. And so I think that's also important, that this wasn't, oh, you tried one thing and, oh, you found cycling and everything was so much better in your life, but that it was a process. And so as we listen, it's encourage people to continue to try, and it may not work out. It's not a failure, it's another lesson. And we're just prepping ourselves for really what that ultimate thing we find in our life that brings us joy or happiness.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be cycling, right? For any of us, it has to be something that shows up that you connect with in that moment. And we can try something, it may not work in that time, but you can try that thing later and it might work for you. And as I said, it's planting seeds along the journey of hope. And each time I tried something, it wasn't ready, I wasn't ready for it. I really look back, and everything that I did played a part in my stepping stone to getting to that place of hope. That's why I think of the Everest challenge that way. You go up, you go down, you go up and you go down, and then you look back and you climb a mountain. The small things are really the big things in mental health, that you do try little things and little actions to get you to the different places. And yes, as you said, nothing's a failure, it's just movement.
So we're getting some really good questions here from the audience. I am going to give Melissa a few minutes to go over some of our education resources, because I feel like that's a very important aspect of this. I just want to reiterate one comment that we had from the audience, which I think was beautiful. But Jessica just commented that, Kim, to your point, referring to your mental, and I want to repeat this for everyone because I think this is really important, referring to your mental illness as a partner is one of the most beautiful phrases I've heard. It presents the opportunity to work with the diagnosis and then not simply trying to fix it. So Kim, just another great takeaway we had from your story. And so with that, Melissa, we'll turn it over to you to do some of the resources, and then we'll go into more of these Q&A.
Great, thank you. And there's also some really good questions coming in that I think it's important that we spend some time responding to during the Q&A. So if we can just tag those, that would be great. We thought what we would do is spend a few minutes just highlighting some takeaways if you yourself are struggling, or maybe you know somebody who is struggling and you're trying to support them. And I will say, just even based off of one of the comments that we just heard, there is never going to be 100% perfect protocol that is going to catch and support everybody 100% of the time. We can often feel very guilty with our inability to protect somebody from causing self-harm, and just know that there's never, ever going to be 100%. All that we can do is these little practical tools that we're about to talk about, and know that we've done our best reaching out. And sometimes we have to remove the outcome as an option. In terms of helping yourself, what we try to do is blend kind of two aspects together. How do you help yourself, but then also how do you help others? And what is it that we need to look for? So we know that mental health conditions can present in many different ways because they have their own set of symptoms. So a good rule of thumb is, when you're trying to figure out what it is I'm supposed to be looking for, we want to look for changes, challenges, and coping. So here's what that means. In terms of changes, when mental health conditions tend to flare up, we can start to notice changes in moods, behaviors, or social interactions mostly. We want to look for changes in frequency, intensity, and duration. This usually will give us a little indicator that something is up for them. So for example, let's take something very common like sleeping. For somebody who may struggle with a mood condition like bipolar or depression, a small indicator that they may be struggling could lie in just their sleeping pattern. Maybe they're sleeping more or less, for example, and this sleeping change could happen over several days or several weeks. And it's a very subtle change. Sometimes the subtle changes, though, act like alarms to let us know that something's going on. So what we're really doing is trying to do that self-inventory and temperature check that Kim talked about in her session, and asking ourselves, are these changes happening to me, or am I noticing them in my loved ones or the people that I'm trying to support? The next is, we want to ask ourselves, has there been any major challenges, losses, transitions, or stressors that have taken place in the last several weeks? It can take a few weeks for mental health conditions to really show up after somebody has endured a hardship. People who struggle with mental health conditions can usually do a fairly good job holding it together short term. But as time goes on, it's not unusual to start to see these changes happen, because truly they can just get to a point of exhaustion from holding it together for so long. So we usually do see like a dip in mental health challenges after a crisis or a challenge has happened. And then lastly, we want to look for how you or they are coping. Has alcohol and drug use increased at all? Has there been any reckless behavior? Is there any isolating or withdrawing happening, lashing out, or changing an irritability with others? Are the usual feel-good activities like cycling, for example, being skipped? If so, these shifts can be a little indicator that something is brewing and a more thorough check-in is needed, for example. The next thing we want to do is to really understand our role. So what is our role when ourselves are struggling or somebody else is struggling? And this slide is really going to be towards like how you might support somebody else, but we're going to just kind of go through it as if you're trying to help somebody. So let's face it, we're all kind of compelled to help somebody when we know that they're going through a hard time. But we have to make sure that we know our role as a helper, and using bike terminology, hold your line as a helper. This requires you to check in with yourself and ask yourself, am I trying to be a helper, a healer, or am I unintentionally hurting them? Helpers are people who act like guides to resources. They are listeners, encouragers, they're patient, empathetic, and they sit with you during your struggle. They rarely give advice unless asked for them. Healers, on the other hand, are those who practice healing for a living. So these are people who are licensed and trained to give medical and emotional advice and prescribe treatments. We sometimes think that we are healers when we are not. And unfortunately, sometimes our advice in an effort to help can actually unintentionally hurt somebody. And I'll give you a really good example based off of my own experience. You might think that certain vitamins work really well for you, but a certain vitamin can actually send a bipolar person into an episode having the opposite effect. So although your well-intentioned piece of healing advice that, oh, you should take this vitamin because it really helped me, it actually can cause unintentional harm to somebody who's struggling with a mental health condition. So important to recognize your role as a helper and making sure that you are truly helping and not trying to step into a healing place, because you can ultimately unintentionally hurt somebody as a result. Next, we want to know how to help. There are appropriate ways that you can help as a helper. You can start by asking, do you want practical help, comfort, or a solution? When you're struggling, think about what it is that you need. And then if you're somebody who's supporting somebody, that question will empower them to think about what it is that they need. Practical help can look like ordering food to be sent to them, cleaning their kitchen, taking their trash out, walking their dogs, picking up their kids from an after-school program, for example, or sending a little self-care package. Comforting help can look like listening, being with them and watching a movie, sitting in silence with them, giving them a hug, encouraging them to use comfort items like wrapping themselves up in a warm blanket and wearing their PJs, drinking their favorite tea, and getting some pet therapy like Kim had mentioned with her dogs. Solution-based help can look like offering help to troubleshoot problems. So that might look like engaging in coping skills with them, like going for a walk, helping them identify where they can place their control. Similar to what Kim had talked about, it sounded like her husband was offering solution-based help, like, hey, look outside, let's find things to be grateful for us. Using positive self-talk or mantras, helping them explore their resources are all solution-based types of help. So the key here is to never assume that you know what they want, but instead just ask, can I support you in a practical way, in a comfort way, or in a solutions-based way? Next, this slide, know your boundaries. This is where a lot of people often struggle. And a general rule of thumb is that you never want to work harder than the person that you're trying to help. This is because the mental health condition isn't yours to have ownership over. It is theirs. Therefore, they have to be the driver, which leads to point number 2. As a passenger, you want to be a collaborator and someone getting their help. So you want to work together with them. You don't want to be the only one that they are leaning on as a helper, because usually people who struggle with mental health conditions need helpers and healers in their repertoire of support system. So good boundaries means making sure that you are helping somebody get the help from other people and professionals, including yourself. And lastly, working too much. If this is you, sometimes when we work too hard, that means that we could come up against something called compassion fatigue. And this is when you might overcare to the point that it's the only thing that you're thinking of. Or the opposite could happen, which is you might numb out and not recognize their need for support. And the best antidote for compassion fatigue is self-care. So you need to know when to do self-care. Showing up for somebody who's struggling can be a lot of emotional work. And if you yourself are struggling, then you know how exhausting it can be. So when we don't take care of ourselves, we lose that energy that Kim talked about in our tank over time, which means that that energy that we have left starts to get limited in all of the other important areas of our lives as well. So here's what we say about self-care. If you're not doing it on a daily basis, you're just not doing it enough. Daily self-care should be fairly easy and simple. And if you're somebody who struggles with finding time for self-care, I would recommend that maybe you set an alarm and give yourself 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes in the evening before you go to bed. What you do with that time is your choice, but research tells us that simple is better. So things like breathing, meditation, journaling, finding things to be grateful for, stretching, or listening to music can all create positive outcomes for your mental health. What it means to find middle ground is that it's so important that at least once a week you try for longer periods of self-care. This is an opportunity for a mindset reset. Because here's the thing that we know about self. If you don't make it a priority, your body will eventually force you to make it a priority. Lastly, a good helper knows how to find good resources. And good resources are supportive people, so friends and professionals, supportive places, things like counseling centers, groups, church programs, and online communities, and supportive practices such as good treatment facilities or outpatient programs, doctors, therapists, coaches, or guides. And keep in mind, this doesn't always have to be Western medicine based. A good place to start when you're trying to support yourself or somebody else is by asking, who are the people who are currently in my support system supporting me? Who are the professionals that are in there? And what have I tried in the past? What has worked and what didn't work? This will help illuminate for you where missing links are in your support chain. What we know is that feeling connected is the #1 safeguard for anyone struggling with mental health conditions. So the goal is to figure out how to create links to people, places, and practices so that the support chain feels as connected as possible for somebody who is struggling. We will be dropping a few of those resources in the chat box now. So just to recap, if you yourself are struggling or somebody else is, look for subtle changes. Remember your role as a helper. Ask yourself or others, what is it do I need or what do you need? Know your boundaries, do self-care daily, and get connected.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. That was super helpful. And you really touched on a lot of the themes that we heard from Kim. And as Kim just noted in the chat, we will be sending out all this information afterwards, the slides and some commentary to the slides. We have some really good questions. I know we only have 10 minutes left formally, but we will be staying on a little longer. So if you guys do want to stay on, we definitely want to make sure that we get to some of these great questions. So the first question, Melissa, I'm going to have you address it first, and then Kim, you can add in after Melissa responds. And so we had a comment from someone in the audience that they had a friend that unfortunately recently took their own life. And this person in attendance asked or said they felt like they should have known or been able to impact this person more positively, and that this person that took their life would always say, I'm fine, this will pass. And her question is there anything she could have done differently? And just she's overwhelmed. And what is your advice for someone in this position? Or if you have someone that's really struggling, anything you can add to help out with these people?
Yeah, the first thing I will say is that even if you have the ability to look for these subtle changes that we talked about, know that some people actually don't present any changes at all. And those people tend to be the hardest people to support because they do say that they're fine. And of course, we want to respect their wishes. What often happens in scenarios like this is this in grief, it's a survivor's guilt that can happen. Did I see the signs? Did I not do enough? Did I not reach out enough? Was there something that I could have done differently that may have saved her life? Those questions there's immense benefit in working that out in like a therapeutic setting and learning a little bit more about suicide-based related survivor's guilt. And I do have a really good book that I would recommend that I'll put into the chat box here for you to consider checking out. But I want you to know that it is not unusual, the experience that you're going through, and it's certainly the experience around like racking your brain around what could I have done differently, especially when she said that she was fine, or he said that she was fine. Her. So I know that she wanted also to hear from Kim to speak on this, but that would be my 2 cents, is just to know that this type of survivor's guilt is very common and that we don't always see signs. As much as we'd like to look for them and notice them, they're not always super visible, or they're so subtle that we don't pick up on them.
Yeah, I think Melissa fielded that quite well, and Sally, I'm so sorry, for your loss and for your pain. And for the pain that your friend was feeling. The only thing I would add to that is that, I I knew that I was loved and I knew that I was cared for. Um, you know, it, it's when you are at that point, your brain's not working right, real well. And sometimes people just lose hope and it's a really difficult thing. But I mean, you did what you can. And like Melissa said, I mean, survivor's guilt is a really difficult thing, but we just have to keep trying and doing our best. But sometimes um, I just want, as someone, keep telling my family that if things would have been different, it was never going to be their fault. So I just want people to understand that from my perspective. Um, so yeah.
All right, Melissa, thanks for sharing that resource in the chat. So the next question, Kim, I will have you respond first, and then Melissa, if you have anything to add. So the comment was, this person says, I want hope in my life, but I'm struggling to take the first step to enjoy the things I once loved. So Melissa, this goes back to kind of some signs, not enjoying things you once really enjoyed. And so this person's asking Kim kind of, how can one take the first step after mentally preparing that is what they want to do? So this goes back to kind of that change process. So she recognizes where she is, but she wants to start enjoying things. Can you give any advice on this?
I think what's important to put to that is we talk about things we once loved. So then we associate the feelings we once had with that one passion. And I would invite you to meet yourself where you are in that moment and basically be gentle with yourself and say, you know what, I'm going to try this thing I once loved and I'm going to give it a shot. And it could be for a short amount of time, whatever it might be, whether it's cycling or cooking or poetry, and be okay with whatever outcome happens, meaning that don't look for the exact same response to what you had when you were feeling, when you weren't feeling depressed. Because if we don't assign judgment to something, then we're more gentle with ourselves. So it's more like taking a step to try it again, try something. If it's not working, be okay with that. Be like, I'll go back to it now. But what if I try it without an expectation of what it should feel like or what it should be like? And you kind of reframe it because we aren't in that same space. And maybe it also means inviting a friend or asking a friend to help you in that moment with it. Be like, look, I want to try this again, but I just don't know what it's going to be like. And it'd be really helpful if you could be there to support me. It's just trying different things at different times. And like I said, reframing it. That was a huge thing for me, reframing it.
Yeah, I think that touches really personally to me too, and just what cycling used to mean for me and what it means now. And riding fast and racing 5 years ago was all I cared about, and now it's riding slow and talking to people and having an impact in the community. And that's all about reframing something I love and I still love to do, but seeking different outcomes. Kind of reinvigorated my love for the sport. So really helpful, Kim. So the next question, Kim, this is for you as well. Oh, sorry, Melissa, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I think the only thing that I would add is it's okay to start. There's this concept called habit stacking, and it's this idea that in order, say you want to get back to cycling, but have the energy to do the full action, you would start small with this concept of habit stacking. So maybe for the first day you put your cycling clothes on and you don't actually get on your bike, but you just get dressed in your cycling gear. And then the next day, maybe you get your bike prepped. You get your clothes on, you get your bike prepped. And then maybe the next day you get your clothes on, your bike prepped, and then you just sit on your bike. And then so you could see this formation of stacking. It's really doing small steps in order to get to the outcome that you're hoping to get to. So it's giving yourself permission to take your time to get back to the things that matter to you most.
And then Melissa, to what Kim mentioned earlier, like positive self-talk. So if you get your shoes on, like congratulate yourself. That's a job well done. So being positive and accepting where you are and being positive with yourself when you make small improvements. So that's a great concept of habit stacking. So the next one, Kim, was, do you have any suggestions or ideas of when you're having, an anxious day, you're feeling low energy, just a bad day. And we all have these. We wake up and it's just not there. What are things that you could suggest to get someone on the bike, or whatever it is, whether they want to ride their bike or they need to do work or whatever? What is ideas to kind of flip that mindset into a more positive space for the day?
Well, I think what we just touched on, what Melissa was just talking about, was habit stacking. I think is a phenomenal idea for someone who is having that kind of anxiety, because it's. I know when people have. I know for me, when I had panic attacks or anxiety attacks, it's hard to think in the moment. There's just so much stuff going on. You're having trouble breathing. There's just too many things in your head. But if you start to take things in small steps or certain increments, where you take like a certain goal, like Melissa said, get your bike prepped, or put your kit on, or put your helmet on, and you have very direct actions that you're taking. It helps you define what your goal is. For me, like I said, I have to, when I keep saying, the small things are really the big things, it's just kind of breaking it down in achievable goals in that moment. And then also meeting yourself where you are. So what if you said to yourself, you know what? I'm really anxious. I really think I need to get out and do something outside, but I just don't think I have the energy for it. What if you gave yourself a quantitative thing? Like, I'm going to give myself 5 minutes for a walk. And if I don't feel good in 5 minutes, I'm going to give myself permission to come back from that walk. Or, in cycling, maybe it's 5 miles or 10 miles or whatever it might be, or 30 minutes you try on the bike. And if it's not working, you're like, I tried, I got out there, and give yourself credit for that. But for sure, for me, it's really taking, when you're anxious, it's very chaotic. So just if you can break it down in small steps, what can you do? And then you feel like you're achieving certain things. I don't know if that helps. Maybe Melissa has something to add to that, because I know she's really good with anxiety stuff.
Somebody who has anxiety, yes. Well, you had mentioned something about 5 minutes, and there is a concept called the 5-minute rule, which means that if you can engage in something for 5 minutes, the likelihood of you continuing on past 5 minutes is very high. However, I will say this: if you are feeling anxious, that goes back to being aware of what's going on in your body. And anxiety is an alarm system for you, indicating that something is up. So the first thing I would do is kind of do that inventory. What is going on? Why am I feeling anxious? Try and figure it out. Maybe it's your body's way of saying, I need a timeout and actually not engage in any stimulus and like power down. Or it's maybe the flip, and like, no, getting out and getting some exercise in will actually calm this anxiety out for me. So really use that as an internal alarm system to really ask what's going on, and then that'll help you possibly figure out your best route of action after that.
Great. So we are at 6:30. So I do want to, I think we addressed the majority of the questions. There were a couple questions that came in before Melissa spoke, but I think she did a fantastic job of addressing, if we're trying to help someone, what are things we can do? And then the concept of helping, healing, and hurting, and the different methods we can use when we're trying to help someone. I know that really touched home with me, Kim, when we first spoke. So I think we addressed those questions well enough during. So I do want to, at this time, wrap. I know, Kim, you have a final message for our audience, and then same with Melissa. So I will turn it over to Kim.
Okay, great. Well, again, thank you for having me tonight. I just wanted to mention that, as we mentioned in our introductions, both Melissa and I are board members for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and we have a strong commitment and passion for suicide prevention. And at AFSP, we bring trainings and programs into our schools or agencies and companies throughout our community. And we're able to offer these at no cost because of our fundraising efforts throughout the year. So if you know of any opportunities where we can be of service, or would like to know more about AFSP, or volunteering with us, or maybe you want to join us for Out of the Darkness Walk to Fight Suicide, I'd be more than happy to connect with you, and I will put my contact information in after just a few minutes. I want to leave you with this thought. Everybody's journey is different, and what works for one person or worked for me may not work for you. Mental illness affects people at different ages and stages in their lives. It does not discriminate based on race, age, wealth, gender, or identity. And for some of us, it's short term, and for some of us, it's a lifelong journey. We have to be gentle with ourselves. We can't expect perfection. There's no artist's airbrush for a living, breathing human living a real life. We don't have to accept standards set by others of what normal looks like, and we have to accept who we are, although certainly some days, admittedly, it's harder than others. The most important thing I hope you take away is that you don't have to adopt my lessons, my discoveries, or aspects of my journey, because that's not what matters. It's your journey that matters. And what matters is that there is hope for you, for your loved ones, and for your discoveries, and for your journey. I am simply an example that this can be done. And if I can do it, you can. So give yourself permission to try and try again. Perhaps the same thing more than once, as I mentioned. There's no failure, there's only movement. I learned a long time ago that through this process, that I'm not always going to be happy. Stopped seeking happiness a long time ago. I want to be healthy, content, balanced, and centered. I feel if I can manage that day to day, the rest takes care of itself, and that hope will remain. And if hope can for me, it can for you. Thanks again for having me tonight. I really appreciate the platform. Lauren, Eileen, thank you so much for bringing this important topic to a head, and to everyone who showed up, and to Melissa for your insight and supportiveness as always.
And we'd like to end this the same way we began this, which is having you speak your truth. What is one word to describe today's Bespoken webinar for you? So that way, we can feel the sense of community in the room, and hopefully know that we are so appreciative of your time and your attention to this topic. Validated, inspired, understood, hope, informative, heart-touching, essential, powerful, love, awesome, not alone, brave, and hope.
Yeah, and so thank you guys. And I think, Kim, if we think about why we want to bring this inspiration and hope are really some of the big themes we had for tonight. And so I'm glad that's kind of the takeaway we're having. I want to personally thank you, Kim, and you, Melissa, for taking the time. I've learned so much from you guys, and I hope everyone has a great evening. Eileen, do you want to say any final closing words as we thank our community and Kim and Melissa?
No, and also Lauren, thank you for, you do the brunt of pulling all this together. And we do have a fantastic community, and it's just great that we can all really, rely on each other when we need to. So great job. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Kim.
And thank you to everyone out there. Everyone have a great, happy evening.